She's been called everything from a pundit extraordinaire to a right-wing telebimbo. But one thing Ann Coulter has not been called is understated. In her latest book, Slander, Liberal Lies About the American Right, the controversial author takes on big media, big government, and most of all, liberals. Ann Coulter, good morning. Nice to see you.
Nice to see
all right,
you.
So your main thesis, Ann, is that liberals really misrepresent conservatives and the conservative movement. Isn't that accurate?
Yes, a little bit more than that, and that is that political debate with liberals is basically impossible in America today because liberals are calling names while conservatives are trying to make arguments. And when every one of your arguments is characterized as an attempt to bring back slavery or resegregate lunch counters, it's a little hard to have any sort of productive debate. I mean, I have no problem with invective, obviously, but the name of my book isn't invective, it's slander, and I think there ought to be a point to the invective.
What are some of the big liberal lies that are out there in your estimation?
I don't rank them, but
I'm not asking you to either. Just tell me what you think they are.
I would say it's really all the same lie, which is conservatives are either stupid or scarily weird, and therefore you don't have to deal with their ideas. Just set them aside. This is a crazy person. It's a Nazi, someone who wants to engage in racism, sexism, homophobia. So don't listen to that person's ideas. Take a quote out of context and dismiss that idea. The idea that Ronald Reagan was stupid, which I document at great length in my book. I mean, that is a stunning, stunning fact. The man, the bumbling old guy who won the Cold War, the way he was demeaned and attacked as being stupid. Meanwhile, when he was going into his second term, suddenly there was a spate of special interest articles on senility and senility, growing senility, and how old Ronald and you got encroaching senility. Meanwhile, half of the Supreme Court justices were older than he was, and I didn't notice any of the liberal media asking that Justice Thurgood Marshall or Justice Brennan or Justice Blackmun resign, though they were deciding life and death issues from the Supreme Court.
I think I do have to bring up a section of the book where you talk specifically about me, and this is not where you call me the Ava Braun of liberalism, which I'll ask you about. The affable. Oh, thanks. That makes me feel so much better. But you talk about the media bias against Ronald Reagan and use a quote and open from the Today Show where we say, an airhead, Ronald Reagan is an airhead, and we're quoting Edmund Morris. But frankly, in the book, you make it sound as if I was saying that rather than Edmund Morris. And I guess one of your problems is with even using that is that he said he was an apparent airhead, and we failed to say apparent airhead. And during the course of the interview with Edmund Morris, I really conducted an extremely challenging interview with him because he did eviscerate Ronald Reagan in his book. It was a very, very unflattering portrayal. The Reagans were very unhappy with it. Conservatives were very unhappy with it. Afterwards, Edmund Morris was unhappy with the interview, and Nancy Reagan called to thank me for my line of questioning. So I'm just wondering how that jives with your contention that somehow I'm a Ronald Reagan basher.
Well, I didn't call you a Ronald Reagan basher, I said.
Well, you used me as an example of liberal bias against Ronald Reagan, and I'm just curious why you took it so out of context.
Well, I don't think I did. You're taking it out of context.
No, no.
What I said was, which is true, that the Today Show opened, I believe it was 3 days in a row, with the announcement, Ronald Reagan was an airhead. That's the conclusion of this new book by Edmund Morris. When Edmund Morris came on for that interview with you, he described that as a grossly unfair characterization of his point. And
well, we should also point out
his entire book was contradicting that. So when the author himself and George Bush, the vice president, was interviewed about this, all say that that was a grossly unfair characterization. Right, well, then whose characterization was it?
And
it wasn't Edmund Morris. He certainly denies it.
Well, actually, he backpedaled considerably. If you had read the book by Edmund Morris, you would have seen that he was extremely critical.
No, I didn't like
Ronald
the book,
Reagan
but he didn't call him an airhead.
He called him an apparent airhead. He did call him an apparent airhead. I have the quote right here if you'd like me to read it.
No, I've read the quote, and it's in my book.
He said that young Ken Timmons,
I don't think
of the blue eyes and enchanting brace, played occasional hooky from the White House speechwriting department to help me build a chronology, and I was about to hire a full-time assistant, yet the magic of Geneva had faded. Judge remained a mystery to me, and worse still, dare I entertain such heresy in the hushed and reverent precincts of his office, an apparent airhead. So these are Edmund Morris's words. But let's
what was also in his words, though, when he came on your show, was that was a grossly unfair characterization, and that was at the beginning of the book. He said he described him as an apparent airhead on a very first meeting, and that the entire course of the rest of his book was contradicting that. So for the Today Show to be opening 3 days in a row, Ronald Reagan was an airhead.
It was
I'm
one
sorry,
day.
That's dishonest.
And also, just for your information, it was one day.
No, you said it one day. Matt Lauer said it another day.
No, it was just one day, and we'll get the transcripts for you. But anyway, he also said, Edmund Morris, beyond amazement, I was distressed by the relentless banality, not to say incoherence, of the president's replies and interviews. So he did make these, and he didn't really switch in the book, but we don't want to get too mired in this.
Yes, by the way, my book is not only solely not about this quote, it is not solely about the Today Show.
Well, let's move on then and talk about it. Let's just talk about the religious right. Actually, since I'm conducting this interview, one of the things you say is the religious right is misrepresented by the liberal media, that it isn't some organization that has club members, and that it's used too sort of freely by liberals in the media. What do you mean by that? Can you elaborate? Because I think that's an interesting point.
It's more than that. The religious right is misrepresented. It's the idea that this is this Orwellian totemic symbol for people to hate. And when you try to figure out what the religious right is, it ultimately comes down either to one man, Pat Robertson, or anyone who believes in a higher being and wants his taxes cut. As the New York Times apparently describes the religious right. I mean, I've gone searching through transcripts and newspaper articles to figure out exactly what they're talking about. It seems to be anyone who wants his taxes cut and wants to eliminate the National Endowment of the Arts. Well, so you're either talking about, half of America or one man. And still, this is used as an example to frighten Americans. The religious right is presumed to be self-evidently fanatical, intolerant, as, for example, the quote that has so captured the imaginations of gossip columnists, my calling you the affable Eva Braun of morning TV. They can't put everything in context, but the context of that was a speech in which you blamed the dragging death of James Byrd on the intolerance created by evangelical Christians, which is just an astonishing statement.
Actually, I didn't, but I'll have to get the exact transcript to quote you.
As luck would have it, all of these quotes are in my book. That is in the footnote.
Okay, we'll look at that. But I think the real problem you had was with the Matthew Shepard interview. And again, I don't want to do a tit for tat here because there are a lot of broader issues in your book that I want to talk to you about. One is that you take Walter Cronkite to task for criticizing Jerry Falwell for the remarks he said after September 11th. You write about what Falwell said, saying Falwell, it seemed, had remarked that gay marriage and abortion on demand may not have warmed the heart of the Almighty. In fact, here is what Falwell actually said, something he incidentally later apologized for. He said, I really believe that the pagans and the abortionists and the feminists and the gays and the lesbians who are actively trying to make that an alternative lifestyle, the ACLU, People for the American Way, all of them who have tried to secularize America, I point the finger in their face and say, you helped make this happen. Do you agree with Jerry Falwell? And shouldn't you have focused perhaps some of your attention on those remarks rather than on Walter Cronkite's distaste for what Jerry Falwell said?
Not after September 11th. I did find it quite astonishing that after September 11th, liberals seem to be in overdrive watching out for the statements of Christians. I mean, what Jerry Falwell said there, whether you agree with it or not, is really fairly standard Jerry Falwell Christian doctrine. Yes, he's against abortion. He's against homosexuality.
But to blame them for the events of September 11th, you didn't find that a little disconcerting?
No, what he said was that the Almighty had stopped protecting America because America was no longer asking for God's help. This is straight Christian doctrine, and even if it had been some sort of peculiar sect of Christianity, as opposed to straight Christian doctrine, I think it's a little bit peculiar that everyone was jumping on the statements of a Christian minister after thousands of Americans were slaughtered by Islamic fundamentalists.
You were also fired, I guess, because you wrote in the National Review that we should, when it came to fighting terrorism, we should invade their countries, kill their leaders, and convert them to Christianity. Do you still believe that that's the best way to combat terrorism worldwide?
Well, that's a somewhat dishonest quote. I was referring to the people in the previous sentence of that column cheering and dancing in the streets right now. And in fact, this the way that was so widely misquoted is an example of what I describe in my book, which is the constant mischaracterization, switching a small word, taking out the word apparent. It makes a big difference, and these subtle differences that are then glossed over as if there's absolutely no difference, to try to portray conservatives as crazy people, as Nazis, slave owners, sexist, homophobic. How about dealing with our ideas? I mean, I've written 2 books now. I've written hundreds of columns. I've been on TV hundreds of times. The idea that someone can go out and find one quote that will suddenly, you know, portray me, just dismiss her ideas, read no more, read no further. This person is crazy.
Well,
this is precisely what liberals do all the time.
But obviously the National Review had a problem with these articles and some of the pieces you did because you were fired from that job. Can you elaborate, or at least tell us what you exactly meant?
That also isn't quite true. I mean, I write a syndicated column. I write for Human Events. That's the newspaper that hires me. People buy a syndicated column, they drop the column. But a lot of people don't like me for a lot of different reasons,
well, why don't you
including
explain what you meant
that they're
then?
my competitors.
What do you think is the best way to battle
Well,
terrorism?
point one and point 2 by the end of the week had become official government policy. As for converting them to Christianity, I think it might be a good idea to get them on some sort of hobby other than slaughtering infidels. I mean, perhaps that's the Peace Corps, perhaps it's working for Planned Parenthood, but I've never seen the transforming effect of anything like Christianity.
Well, Ann Coulter, it's all...
By the way, Mel Gibson said the word and he completely... I don't think he's a nice man. Let's just start with that. And he also hates Jews, and he hates women, he hates everybody. Right. So let's not defend Mel Gibson. Let's move on to Prince Charles, who loves us all.
Okay, who's defending Mel Gibson?
Well, she said let's give him a chance.
No, I actually didn't say that.
What'd you say?
I said that he was a friend of mine, and I didn't think he was a racist, having spent a lot of time with him.
Well, not one-on-one.
Yes, one-on-one.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is it's not about one-on-one. It's about everybody. We all can like an individual.
Yes.
Whoops. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, but also, Joan, you know, folks say dumb stuff all the time.
That's tough, dumb.
Well, you know,
when you hate
my God, you know what?
let's
not do this. Okay, let's not do this. I'm not doing this with any more people.
Okay.
You don't like him, that's okay. He's my friend, I don't care.
Let's do this. Let's go.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so
And the Holocaust happened. Now let's continue.
This is just a very sweet little daytime show. Okay,
Yes.
can we go on, or you want to say something?
Well, I just want to say I never, ever would ever question whether the Holocaust happened.
I didn't say it to you.
Can I move on?
Saying it to him
and say it to him.
And his father.
Are you kidding? How long do we know each other?
I may get up and walk off this.